Good afternoon, everyone. I think we'll go ahead and get started. So my name is Kim Crosby. I'm the interim director of the City Center of Regional Policy and Development. And we are a co-sponsor of this event along with the Office of Public Engagement and Signal Health Campus. I'll start with the land acknowledgement. I think we're going to get started. Wait a second. We're good? Okay. Land acknowledgement. We acknowledge the lands on which Memorial University's campuses are situated, our individual territories of labor, indigenous groups. We acknowledge with respect the histories and cultures of the Beothuk, Mi'kmaq, Innu, and Inuit of this province. We encourage everyone to reflect on the lands where you are located and the indigenous peoples for whom those lands are traditional territory. A couple of housekeeping items. Should we be required to leave the building? Of course, the main entrance is out the door to the right. That path is accessible. If not, if you just go out through the doors, turn to the left, and on your left, you'll get to the stairwell, and that will bring you to one floor down to a lower exit, which you can leave. Our muster station is at the top of the parking lot, where all the big trucks are right now for the Hudson Rex production. So that's where we are to gather if we leave the building. Washrooms are down the hallway, just here at the very end. There's a gender neutral washroom, and out towards the main entrance are where our regular washrooms are. Any questions about anything on that before we get started? No? Okay. So I'd like to officially welcome everyone, both in person and online, to this session. It's New Ways to Work, how innovations in technology and remote work are impacting Newfoundland and Labrador. And of course, this is happening as part of Memorial's Innovation Research Week 2023. Okay, and to kick things off, we have a short video from Tech and Health that we're going to share.
Is making waves in Newfoundland and Labrador.
There's a momentum. You can feel it building.
Welcome to my new office. We are disrupting the status quo from right here with cutting-edge innovations that are making it different around the world. We're changing the face of healthcare. We're helping young minds with new ways of learning. We're adapting climate change through traditional and innovative methods.
We are making training anything but boring, turning science fiction into reality.
All in a place where life happens at a more livable pace.
And where work can happen right in your backyard.
We build in natural beauty and freshest air just outside your door.
And there's a place for everyone in tech, because tech opens opportunities for people in every industry.
With the support and collaboration from a tech community that's second to none.
And with every wave of opportunity comes another, transforming our traditional sectors.
And jumpstarting brand new ones.
The local tech sector is swirling with momentum.
It's generating well over $1 billion in our economy.
It's here.
With career opportunities in technical and non-technical jobs in all industries.
Tech is making waves in Newfoundland and Labrador.
That's the introduction to the session. Makes me think of my remote work opportunities I'm currently using for sure. Okay, so today's event, we are being live streamed on the Harrison YouTube channel, and we're also going to be recording the session for viewing later on for anyone really to pass on the links. It will be available. So the format for this session is we're going to have a panel discussion that will be, of course, directed, and then following the discussion, we're going to open up to Q&A for both people here in the room as well as online. As I introduce our moderator and panelists, I'm going to ask them to please take a seat up here on the yellow couch. So today's panel is being moderated by Signal Hill Campus's inaugural academic in residence, Dr. Richard Shermer. Dr. Shermer has been professor of economic geography at the McGill School of Urban Planning since 2013. He began his academic career at the University of Quebec's INRS, Institut National de Recherche Scientifique, After his undergraduate degree in Cambridge and prior to completing his master's at McGill and PhD at University of Montreal, he worked for 5 years as a real estate consultant in England and France. The basic question that drives his research concerns the location of economic activity and, by extension, local and regional economic development. From Memorial's Faculty of Business Administration, we have Dr. Trevor Brown, the interim dean. Dr. Brown is a professor of labor relations and human resources and a former president of the Administrative Sciences Association of Canada. Since joining Memorial University, he has also served as the Associate Dean of Research, the Director of the Master of Employment Relations, Master of Science Management, and the PhD Management programs. Dr. Brown's academic background is coupled with extensive industry experience. He worked in the telecommunications and manufacturing sectors prior to completing his PhD at the University of Toronto and remains active in the practitioner community. Given this background, Dr. Brown is well known for his ability to engage both practitioner and academic audiences and to show the real-world implications of his research. Welcome. Next, we have Judah Adeniyi. He's a PhD candidate in management at the Faculty of Research. His research interests are in organizational behavior and human resources. He has a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in economics. Much of his research is focused on the impact of technology on the future of work, and his PhD thesis examines the impact of technology on the current decisions of older workers. Welcome. And we are very pleased to have TechNL represented here today. We have CEO Florian Guillaume. And we've got the project lead, welcome. Might not come out, Megan, I've read you at the same time.
Together.
And you're all going to need for a few minutes. Prior to joining TechNL as CEO in May 2022, Florian launched and developed the Memorial Center for Entrepreneurship, known as MCE, into an internationally recognized, award-winning university center for entrepreneurship. In 2019 and 2020, the MCE was recognized as one of the top emerging entrepreneurship centers in the world. And in 2020, Florian was named to Atlantic Business Magazine's 2020 list of top 50 CEOs in Atlantic Canada. Megan is well acquainted with the local technology and startup sector, having worked at Memorial Startup Incubator with Genesis, as well as with several startups. Megan helps to connect employers and job seekers across Newfoundland and Labrador tech sector with a particular focus on global talent and those interested in relocating. So that ends my official duties of this event. So welcome, I hope you all enjoy it, get the sun as it changes around, light shine in some of your faces. Feel free to get a photo as needed. The other side of the room might be a bit
I
better.
wonder if putting the screening back down, because I imagine.
We can't do that because it's on people's heads then. Sorry about that.
Good idea, yeah.
So I will pass it over to you to get the party started.
Great, thank you very much. Do we need to use this or do our microphones?
You use your clips.
Okay, I'll clip through it.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you all for being here, and thank you all for being here too. Some of you may be wondering what an urban planner is doing on the panel like this. Actually, as a planner, I also do some economic geography, and I am very interested in the consequences of remote work for town centres, for office spaces, and for how cities work. Indeed, my own work in Montreal and in Quebec has been sort of focusing on that. And I think that one of the first things I want to sort of get an idea of from you as panelists is, where are you coming from? I mean, you're not urban planners. We have people from TechNL, people from the business school, but in a way, what is your take on remote work? And do you have any sort of key points you want to make up front to make sure that we don't forget them? And then we'll get on to maybe some more specific questions. And I'll start with you, Trevor. We'll come this way.
So, Dean or interim Dean of Business, but my background is basically people management, HR, labor relations. So for me, it's, I guess the key message is this is here to stay. While for many people, this was seen as sort of a transition with COVID. Everything we're seeing right now is, whether it's fully remote or hybrid, is definitely going to continue going forward. So I think that's sort of the key message. And I tend to look at things, think of how are you going to develop talent when you don't have that person next door? What does it mean in terms of compensation packages? What does it mean in terms of where you go to recruit talent, things like that. So I look at it from kind of a people management side of the house.
Okay, thanks. Megan?
Similar. So at Tech&L, we speak a lot with employers as well as job seekers. So what remote work looks like in terms of compensation packages, and as well, it really opens up the labor market for startups in terms of where they can hire their talent. So there's a lot of different opportunities there. And then for the job seekers, it really it impacts how they're looking for jobs, where they're looking for jobs, if they can come home, and we're seeing some.
Yeah, so I come from two different angles. One is how do we leverage the trend on remote working to grow the tech sector? And we have seen more and more remote workers who work for tech companies outside the province coming back. And so the question is, they come back with their network, they come back with their company. How do we leverage their presence here to grow the presence of their company in the province? So that's the first thing, is kind of how to grow the tech sector. And the second piece is, how do we distribute the workforce in the tech sector? And what we found is, in many tech sector across the country, there tends to be a concentration in big cities. We are very interested to explore how do we leverage remote worker to distribute the workforce in the tech sector throughout the province. And I'm going to share a couple of insight that we are learning along the way.
Great, there's some geography there. I'm happy about that.
Just for you.
And I come from the perspective of, the equity kind of angle, right? Of how those, changes, remote work, hybrid work, how it affects, different categories of workers, right? So my thesis is looking at older workers, right? So how, for instance, is this affecting older workers or people of different kind of abilities, right? And just to see those opportunities and those challenges associated with those different perspectives.
Okay, great. Thanks. You have a very panel here, and I'm quite excited to see what you have to say. I'll start off with you, Trevor, because one of the items that has been raised sort of conversationally in the newspapers is the jurisdictional and the legal aspects of remote work. I mean, people are working in one place, their employer is somewhere else. So what are some of the legal aspects of this, and also who's responsible, say, for safety in the workplace and things like that?
All right, so I'm going to start with the caveat. This is not legal advice, and I'm not a lawyer.
Fair enough.
So the reality is the person is still an employee. So shortly after COVID, there was a case with someone who tripped up on something in their household while working remotely. And the question was, is it covered by workers' compensation? The answer is absolutely yes. Because the employer had basically not only permitted, but was part of the new way of working, had them working remotely. So generally, when I speak to lawyers around, what is the jurisdiction is where the person is based. That is where the law is. If you have engaged them knowing that they're going to be working in location XYZ, wherever that happens to be. So if a local firm here was to hire someone in Saskatchewan, I'm just going to say that they would be governed by the regulations of Saskatchewan because that's where they're based. For workers' compensation, they should be registered there. That's the legal advice when I ask folks, but I'm always going to say, check with a lawyer. These things are evolving going forward. But the employer is still responsible. That landmark case really showed with workers' compensation that the fact that someone was remotely working, and in this case, I think it was something they had left on the floor. It really showed that that doesn't matter. You are now covered by workers' compensation because this happened during work time, and your employer knowing that we were working remotely.
Okay, and has Tech&L or the company that you work with come up against these jurisdictional issues?
We see it more on the admin side. So HR trying to figure out how do we legally hire someone in a different country or in a different area. So there's all sorts of platforms that have sprung up, like Communitech Outposts, Deal, these types of things that go and they act as an employer of record in EOR, so that you can hire someone. But they can be a little bit expensive. And so it's just kind of trying to balance the cost benefit of hiring someone outside of your jurisdiction.
And for Tech&L itself, we are learning along the way too. Like we, for the first time ever, we got 2 employees outside St. John's, one in Corner Brook and one in Happy Valley Goose Bay. So we have been learning, okay, what does it mean to offer remote work? What are the changes we need to do in terms of changing the culture as well? How can we be inclusive with team members when we are distributed in different locations? So we're still learning along the way. Definitely something where one thing that's very important is the ongoing communication in the team and making sure everybody's aligned and engaged in everything we do.
Okay.
Sorry, and I just wanted to piggyback of what Travers said about that safety element. And we've seen certain organizations now say, fine, we have remote work, but then they're specialized workplaces now that allowed for remote work, right? So you can say, oh, I'm in Brazil and I'm doing remote work. So you come, where your workspace basically is approved. Right. So it's not, so then issues around workplace safety, for instance, right? Employers are making sure that they're being covered. And so if, for instance, you have your workspace set up and you get injured, say outside of that workspace, then, they might not be as liable, right? So.
But then in that respect, is the employer then paying for these spaces or?
Yeah.
Okay,
so that's more common now, at least, from where, you get work computers, set up, you get internet, some provide internet.
Screens,
okay.
Desk, sometimes raise the desk.
And that's interesting because it sort of leads on to the sort of equity issue. Because obviously not everybody has internet at home, not everybody has maybe a place to work. And I know that you, Judah, are working on equity issues and whether everybody can work remotely. So what do you find?
So we did, some research where we looked at, or we talked to people with different, occupational background, different socioeconomic backgrounds, just to kind of get a sense of, the situation, and especially from an equity perspective. And one thing that we found, especially in Newfoundland and Labrador, was, one was the digital divide, right? And the fact that the access to technology, access to this, technological assistances that, help remote work and things like that are not equally distributed across the province. There's some people who feel, or there's some people who struggle to, have those, quick internet connections, which could hinder the use of this, kind of technologies, right? And another was those the socioeconomic differences, where some people simply can't afford, right, those technologies, right? So some people might struggle with, even paying for a plan, for instance, right? So those are some of the things that we've seen.
Right. And have you noticed any of these sort of issues with the companies that you're dealing with?
Yeah, I think there's a responsibility for the employer to to make sure that the workplace culture extends beyond a physical location. So we're seeing a lot with remote work. And I would say, yeah, probably culture is the biggest one for sure.
And for the TechNL itself, we're learning along the way, but like there are just questions, what you provide a desk to your employee when they come. So you're also providing, what do you need to provide when they are home? So everything that's just mentioned is the question we are asking right now to understand what do we need to provide and what is the boundary between what the employer needs to provide and part of the daily life of the employee.
And I know that we're sort of focusing a bit on tech companies, but behind this, there's also the question of what jobs can be done remotely and what jobs can't be done. So, Trevor, can all jobs still be done remotely?
So with a lot of family and healthcare, I'll start with no.
Yeah. Okay.
There's certain things that you just can't do remotely.
Mm-hmm.
And I think even, so I look at the faculty of business, we enable hybrid work. We don't have anyone who's fully remote. We've got to look operationally at the nature of the role. If someone, for example, is in a reception role in reception, that's tough to do remotely or to do hybrid. So no, the reality is the research has been pretty clear that it's often those that are more economically advantaged, educated in those types of roles that have access to remote work. And I think you saw that during the pandemic. This isn't all about the pandemic, but think of the pandemic when you saw, the folks in grocery stores and places that, sometimes are more marginalized, had way less access to remote work. than someone like me at a university or elsewhere. So no, I don't see a day where it's going to be for everybody. But I think where it has had inroads, it's not going to stop. I don't know if that makes sense.
Right,
That's the way I'd phrase it.
So changing gears a bit now, going sort of to the employers. So flexible work, I mean, my perception is there's a bit of an arm wrestle going on now between employees who want to go all flexible and employers who are beginning to realize that actually it's hybrid work, and so there's sort of a bit of tension, particularly in the tight labor market. So how is this playing out with firms who are trying to recruit employees, particularly in the tech sector?
Yeah, no, it definitely makes a big difference. It's all part of the compensation package, how flexible an employer is willing to be. And so what we're finding now is that top talent are not really even looking at companies that are not competitive in this way. If they're really rigid and saying, you know, you have to be in the office 9 to 5, then that's something that doesn't appeal to a lot of people anymore. And it also affects the compensation structure as well. Like it's all included there. So for example, if you have people across the country, what does the pay scale look like when the cost of living is different across the country? So there's all sorts of interesting conversations happening.
The compensation one is a really interesting one because there's one school of thought that says it's same pay for same work for all being equally productive. Yet what we're seeing here is same work is being paid differently depending on what you live. So isn't this really a real fundamental question which is being raised by remote work?
Yeah, I find that companies either do it or they don't. So they either adjust or they don't, and it's kind of up to the management of those companies. And then it's also up to them whether or not they want to be transparent about it.
So I see people nodding here. I mean, have you come across this sort of?
Absolutely. I mean, I won't name organizations, but I know some that are saying that, you know, we have a physical presence in a downtown urban, say Toronto, for argument's sake, but the cost of living is quite high in rent, et cetera. If we know we're hiring someone remotely and they're not in the downtown core, we're not paying the same rate, given the fact that they're, you know, it doesn't take the same dollar value for them to maintain the same quality of life. Now, to Megan's point, there are others that are going, you know what, from a competitive perspective, we just have a national pay scale and this is it, and it doesn't matter where you are. But there are some who definitely are making decisions that if we are located in an expensive urban center and we're hiring remotely, we will adjust pay, with the idea being that the flexibility, the ability to not have to relocate, et cetera, is sort of part of your total compensation package. But your base pay, or basically what your normal wages and earnings would be, will be different.
And how are employees perceiving that? If two employees are doing the same job and getting paid differently, how do they? Or they want to say?
I think it depends on the culture. Like I think some organizations are really open about it and some aren't. So I would definitely say that depends. And I think if you have the flexibility to work in the place of your choosing, and nobody is forcing you to work in downtown Toronto, for example, then maybe you're a little bit more willing to be on the pay scale later on.
From a growth of the sector point of view, like we have been exploring on how to attract more remote workers working for tech companies outside the province. And for sure, if there's more companies that adapt their salary according to where you are, well, it doesn't help us to attract more, because if they are in Toronto or here, would be the same, would be adjusted according to the local economy. So like we see the advantage of having like something across the board, especially for companies outside the province.
And this idea of maybe having the same job on different pay scales, does this have any equity or potential equity consequences?
I think so, yes. Just in terms of whether people feel they are being treated fairly or not, whether, you know, paying their proper pay for the work they're doing, right? Well, then it comes into what everyone has, you know, mentioned, you know, is it that trade-off, right? So from an economic perspective, the opportunity cost, right? Or is it, you know, am I getting lesser pay and having more flexibility? Well, so it's just about, you know, that trade-off. But although to the point that it made, when I think about those jurisdictions as well, I'm thinking about even in international markets, right? So we're having companies now, just because, so using the tech sector as an example, right, where, there's and you can, if, this is accurate, just because the tech sector, especially just after the pandemic, there was sort of a boom with AI and things like that, where, it became a bit more expensive to get some certain level, say the senior developer, for instance, right? So, in that kind of scenario, we have some companies now going international, right? Where those people are working remotely, and just because, it's fairly cheaper labor, then they're able to hire those people to do those same amount of work, right? So rather than going to Toronto, where they might have to adjust for the cost of living in Toronto, they might hire from, say, Nigeria, right? That cost of living. I don't know.
Okay. So we've been hinting at some geographic questions, and now I'm going to because
Geographer will prevail.
well, I mean, particularly in the tech sector, but not only in sectors that have remote work can work both ways. It means, the companies, local companies can go and get talent from elsewhere, but that talent, local talent, can also find jobs elsewhere.
Yeah.
For a place like Newfoundland, which is sort of rather remote relative to the big centers in North America, is the balance, I know this is a bit speculative, but is the balance likely to be a drain of talent towards the outside, or is it going to be overall attractive? I know this is speculation. This is a key question, I think, particularly for remoter places. So I'll get you, Florian, to try and...
No, it's a real tension, because at the same time, we want to attract more remote workers and companies to grow the tech sector. At the same time, we don't want to create more competition on talent with local companies. So the way we see it is remote workers from companies from outside, they are the pipeline for local companies, because when they come back, they are more likely to want to be part of a local company than having the physical connection than only having connection outside the province. So that's kind of the pitch, but we need to be careful, because once again, we don't want to create more competition on the market. So it's a real tension, but we see that more as an opportunity for growth. And why we show the video here is that we think that in the province here we have something unique to offer in terms of this kind of intersection of a lifestyle, the quality of life, nature, like the outdoors, the community. Is a part of the workforce outside the province that are very interested in this, and we have seen that already happening since COVID. A lot of people came back. I think many of us know someone who just came back and starting to work remotely for their own company. So now the question is that how do we take advantage of this, while, as I mentioned, not creating more competition with local companies. So it's a real tension.
Yeah, well, I did that actually. I was living away and I came home and I was working remotely, and now I work at Tuckanel, so it works. But yeah, we definitely see it both ways. Tuckanel put out a survey recently to try and get a better pulse on remote workers in the province that aren't working for local companies, and we got about 50 people that responded. So it's really interesting. Like, there are so many different ways to engage those people, because they're here, they're able to, like you said, hopefully join the tech sector. They're here, they want to mentor, they want to engage with the community, and so there's definitely a lot of opportunity there for sure.
Do you have anything wrong?
No, I think it's just really, in HR we talk about total compensation. There's the tangible things. What is your pay? What are your benefits? But more and more you're seeing focus on what I'll call the intangible benefits, work-life balance. And so I have a neighbor who works with a production company in Toronto. He and his spouse relocated back shortly around the pandemic, with the idea being that for quality of life reasons, etc., the nature of the work I'm doing most of the time doesn't really matter if I'm in Toronto, Oakville, or St. John's, but going in for. So I think the more we can sort of leverage the work-life balance side, you're not commuting an hour and a half each way, having looked in large centers, things like that, the more be attractive. The end result, I don't know which way it's going to play out. I can't tell you as an academic. I mean, there is that natural tension of on one side, we can recruit from elsewhere, but that also means other firms can. And if they're offering, the benefit and wage packages of California, that's a very different dollar value than what most of our local employers can provide. And I would say, I mean, for folks from Tech and L, but that's certainly some of the things what I hear sort of when
Yeah.
talking to employers is, you know, those are some of the challenges.
And it's real, like especially for companies, what we have seen, they tend to want more experienced talents. And because we are, you know, smaller ecosystem than any many other places like Montreal, Toronto, they need either to bring them here, which is complicated, or at least start hiring them remotely. And we have seen a lot of companies who hire those people with experience throughout North America, even Europe, to bring that expertise and leveraging it for the success of the company here.
But you mentioned competition for talent, and so are sort of the young sort of graduates from St. John's who are emerging, say, from Memorial University, are they finding it harder to get a job because they're now competing against worldwide talent pools, or is there sufficient demand for that not to be an issue now?
I think the job market is a little bit slow right now, which we can acknowledge, but so anybody here with experience that's looking for a job, I think there's a lot of space for that. There's a lot of graduates and a lot of junior talent that there aren't, they're not always finding jobs, but so it's just finding ways to retain those people so that they don't leave or find jobs in other sectors.
I would almost look at like the junior and more experience, like that's kind of different. When you are junior and you graduate, for the company, it takes a while to actually almost like leverage the value you can bring, because you do a lot of training inside the company. It takes maybe 6 to 9 months to really ramp up. So it's an investment first. So it's a way of seeing it. It takes a little longer for those local companies to hire. So a company from outside the province won't likely hire entry level or junior or graduate right away. So that's protect a little bit the market locally.
But this comes back to an issue that Trevor raised earlier on, is that if there are few workers within company walls, how are junior people onboarded and trained if no one's there? I know I'm exaggerating a bit, but maybe only slightly. So how's that happening?
Yeah, I mean, there are different size of companies too. So
okay, maybe because I know Trevor's.
All right, go Trevor.
So
I think it's a reality that many organizations are looking at. You know, particularly as Megan said, you know, when you think of folks starting their career, you often, you know, if I go back to my career, I had the benefit of being able to be mentored by some of the next office, the ability to walk in. So I think for companies that do this well, they're mirroring that through technology. You know, we have teams, we have folks that meet all the time. There are, you know, Slack channels and things like that to create that sort of ability to get that mentoring. Is it exactly the same? I'm not sure yet in terms of is it the same as kind of face-to-face and going into the cube or office next to you. But folks that do it well have really learned how to leverage the technology to make sure that they have those check-ins, that they have that ability to get that just-in-time question. So I think, Richard, I would go back and frame it this way. If you've got remote workers, what are you doing to develop the talent pipeline?
Okay.
Have you really put some thought into the, you know, so it's not that these folks are just off the side of your desk and you don't think of them. Are you actively engaging? Are you looking at skill sets? Are you checking in? I'm getting to the point I'm convinced I think we can do it remotely as well as we can. Think of education. We managed to get people through courses. Jude, in full disclosure, is my PhD student. For a year, we were meeting virtually. And we still managed to get through what he needed to. But it takes a more deliberate focus than when you've got those intangibles if I'm just, you know, 2 minutes down the corridor. Right?
There's also a difference between a company that's kind of 0 to like 5 to 20, 30 employees than bigger ones. Like limit of how many entry-level graduates smaller companies can handle, especially in a high growth trajectory. But bigger companies usually have set in place a system where they can train and onboard a larger number or proportion of entry-level graduates. So I would say for bigger companies, it's easier. They have the system in place. For smaller ones, it's more challenging.
Mm-hmm. Then coming back to my pet topic, you know, we all have our biases. Geography, we have very much been speaking about sort of St. John's versus other metropolitan areas. But St. John's is a metropolitan area within a very large province, which has many small communities. what's happening in the small communities? Are they finding that people that they're losing their jobs, or people moving out there, or what's happening in Newfoundland?
Can say, I don't want to monopolize. I can share a couple of. First thing is that because of what happened with COVID, more remote workers came back, and I'm always surprised. I go to like Clarenville and Corner Brook. There's always a number of people who have been working outside the province and are coming back and working remotely from those areas. The one thing that we have been doing with the Find Your Future in Tech program, where we are basically supporting and funding to the government of Canada the education of software developers and also digital admin. Since this education is done remotely, we have been very intentional in reaching out throughout the province, and we are starting to see some take up. So just for the software developers program, 24% of people of the software development programs are based outside the Avalon Peninsula. So that creates a number of interesting opportunities for the tech sector. Like we had people in Corner Brook. I had yesterday a chat with someone who has a company in Carbonear, and he was laughing and said, "Well, it's going to be tough to find software developers in Carbonear." And I said, "Actually, we have like between 6 and 10 in that area, Harbour Grace, Carbonear, all that area." So now it creates new opportunities of distributing the workforce. And so that's for us, it's an opportunity of growth, because we could imagine in the future like a distributed, instead of having one big community centralized in St. John's, having a big one here, but also a distributed one in different areas. And even Verapin, they're like employees in different parts of the province too. So it's an opportunity for growth and an opportunity for economic development throughout the province too.
But Judah, I mean, it may be a difficult question. I don't know how much you worked outside of St. John's, but not every place has good internet connections, for instance. So isn't this creating some spatial inequities where some places can benefit and others can't?
Yes, certainly. So we talk with some people, who say, for instance, are working with, people in the trades, for instance, right? And some of the things we heard about, that inability, to access these technologies, where, in terms of, say, you want to do a program online, and how that can be difficult because, people do not have good internet connections, right? We heard issues about people not having enough, say, minutes on their phones, right? And then similar to that, right, is that social economic aspect as well, right? Where, people do not have proper, funding, right, in terms of how they can, navigate, that environment of, technology and remote work, right? But yeah, certainly, that differences are there, even in terms of literacy, right? So people in trades, for instance, right, who, might not have that knowledge on how to use simple technologies, right? So these are some of the things that I think we have to, work on. Because again, many of the things we've mentioned about, say, tech workers or developers, these are people who are educated, right? People who already have those skills, those abilities already ready for them. But now we have to expand a little above that and think about those people who do not even have those access for those basic skills, basically.
I mean, I know none of us here are specialists in infrastructure, but I do know that in Quebec, even now, broadband internet is not available, everywhere, and that really is creating a lot of issues. And there's cell phone coverage is also patchy, so I'm not sure what it's like in Newfoundland.
Like I say, Richard, an island with a Labrador mass.
Well,
absolutely.
I mean,
so there's no question that some of the issue around, while to Florian's point, I think this is a way to create a broadening of the economic benefits beyond the urban regions. Judah was dealing with a slightly different project at the time of, folks who, may not be in the technology sector, but did not know to use technology. The ability to receive an electronic transfer of cash, the ability to invoice, electronically versus, hard, those very basic skills. If you're looking at a remote worker, well, think of today in terms of, we're doing something that's hybrid. If you don't have a good internet system, how are you going to do Zoom? How are you going to do a Teams? How are you going to do all those things that are necessary? So it is, I won't speak for Techno, but it's still a challenge for us in the province. Say that not all places have good, reliable, strong bandwidth for connections, which is fundamental to remote working.
Yeah, I would say we are progressing though. Like there's a lot of funding to expand the access. There's Starlink now. So we're not there yet, but I would say it's progressing in a good way in terms of making access. Like a few years ago, we could not have that many students studying from Bona Vista, Harper Grace. I look at the list of villages, even I was amazed. It's really amazing. And there are also other initiatives that I know, for example, the Memorial University, they have different hubs for helping some of those students and people to connect to have access to internet. So the main thing for me is that when we have this opportunity to leverage the internet, the question is that what do we do with it? How do we leverage the opportunity and we create economic development? Because otherwise it could be just to enjoy access to internet. There is more we can think about. It's like when you think about AI, what opportunities does it create as well?
Right. I know that we're going for 45 minutes and we're going to have to wrap up to allow some people to ask us questions. But there's one last question that I'm interested in, and again, it's my urban planning sort of bias. One of the things that we've noticed in Montreal is that with all this hybrid and remote work, the downtown is suffering. The jobs are still there, but basically restaurants, commerce, offices are empty. St. John's is a smaller city, but it still has a downtown, has a few office buildings. Has there been a change in the activity in downtown St. John's?
Oh, do you want me to go?
Don't end the whole question.
I don't know if it's been to the extent you've seen in places like Toronto, Montreal, where you truly have a commuting culture of people coming in 90 minutes. But certainly the sense I'm seeing is there's more available space downtown than there has been in the past. And that's a combination of some folks physically relocating offices that happened around the same time. And in some cases, people saying, I don't need this much square footage if I've got folks coming in half time. But and I'm not an urban planner, so I don't think we've seen it to the extent you've seen in larger urban centers. But I think if you were to talk and look to get real estate space downtown now, it's probably easier than it was 5 years ago.
Right.
That would be my sense. I know, Florian, you folks are located downtown, so I don't know what you're seeing.
Yeah, but we're moving outside, so
yeah,
but not for that reason. It's more. So we're moving further away on the new innovation center. So that's why we're moving there. But we love the place. I think we are almost still in a transition. Some companies decided to go fully remote and they don't need office space anymore. Some other companies really want all their employees together, so they need to be in place where they can get even more value to be together. And downtown, for sure, restaurants, facilities is very attractive. So I don't see a trend necessarily, but I see the spectrum of companies who are picking different area according to how much their employees and the leadership wants to embrace remote or in person.
Okay, so listen, we'll wrap up the sort of our discussion, although no doubt sort of pick up on some questions. And Trevor, I think you need to go now.
I apologize. It's Research Week and we're doing a kickoff of the Faculty of Business and it really does not look good if the Dean is not there.
Anyway,
So I apologize. I will let Judah field all the questions for me. No, but no, thank you very much, folks. I have enjoyed it. And like I said, I apologize. I have to run, but
all right.
Thanks for coming.
And now then, we can open up for questions. So there's a microphone there. And I believe that questions can be asked online as well. Or remarks, if you have heard things and you are itching to tell us something.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the panel. My name is Kayla and I work at Grenfell campus. So maybe similar to Megan, I was working in Toronto and came back during the pandemic. I was remote from 2014 to 2022. I want to bring a perspective from another part of the province. You touched on so many interesting areas. I think one of the things, for sure, the internet is an issue. It's outside of the or more urban centers. But I think another issue that is facing the province is sort of the culture and the spaces in smaller places. If you are a remote worker, and I think you sort of at the macro level and from an economic development perspective, how are we fostering community integration when workers come back home and they're working remotely and they're not necessarily integrating into community? I know for me, when I was looking to switch jobs, part of me, a lot of my friends, and I had friends from when I lived here when I was younger, and through other connections, when the culture of a community is to work in an office, you sort of can feel isolated when you're working from home, especially if there's not co-working spaces or there's not, obvious places to work, or if your job requires you to be in a, quiet place. So I think there's a real interesting role. Someone mentioned the hubs, and I think as universities, there's real opportunities to help foster that kind of community through the hubs. I know I've been working with the Center for Research and Innovation in Corner Brook, but I think about co-working, because if there's a way to bring in those remote workers and have a sense of belonging, I think that's really important, and will keep them will retain them, but it also might attract others to move and see that they can build a sense of community, whether they're from that community or whether they're from another place moving there. I'd be interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. I think the companies themselves, there's a lot to be said around keeping a culture strong and positive when you do have remote workers across different areas. One of the startups that we just spoke to in our HR peer group said that they flew all their remote workers in once a quarter, every 6 months or whatever it was, just to make sure that they were really getting that team building. But for the workers that you do have that are working remotely, maybe by themselves, we are hoping to kind of engage people a little bit more in that way, because it can be it can be isolating to work by yourself. And I think the Innovation Center, there's going to be some opportunities there. And but yeah, there's a lot to be said about that Newfoundland and Labrador is a competitive place to come and work. It doesn't suit everybody, but it suits a lot of people. So the people that do want to be here at this pace of life and enriched with nature and all these things, then I think we should really use that to our strengths.
And it's your comments about the need for remote workers to feel part of the community and have a co-working space. We have also seen that in the survey that we did, where it was a top thing that they were looking for in the survey, and we found that very interesting. So that's why we were so excited to look at how do we distribute the workforce throughout the province, and having almost different smaller communities of tech workers, because that's kind of solved that. And even if you are in a small village or a small town, then maybe it's not going to be 8 hours from your place to join the community, but it would be just a few hours. One thing I was thinking as well when you were saying that is there might be an interesting parallel between remote workers who come back to their location or the city, and immigrants. Because when you're immigrants, you don't have any. You arrive in the place where everybody has their own network, and you have to rebuild it from scratch. So there might be some good practices to learn from that process of immigration.
I mean, one of the things that I've done some work on co-working spaces, and one of the things that I have noticed that they do require a critical mass to function, and some remote places just can't get that critical mass, or people have to travel too far. For that. So in other words, I think you're quite right. This sort of space is important, but it's not going to work everywhere.
So I'm John Scott. I have a share in social enterprise at Memorial. I'm sort of susceptible to utopian thinking, and always have been, and it's hasn't necessarily been to my benefit, but some of the things that I'm hearing about hubs and people distributed in smaller communities make me wonder, and maybe you know if this is happening anywhere. It seems to me that companies of some substantial size and deep pockets could set up remote, sort of specialized remote campuses in smaller communities, provide the infrastructure that is required for people to get together and brainstorm and do the things that people sort of need to do face to face, but do it in a place that is beautiful and inexpensive to live in and so on. Is anybody pursuing that kind of a model that you're aware of?
I have not seen that in the province. What I've seen is, I think comes back a little bit at the critical mass. First, there needs to be a number of people in that community and enough workers from the same company. And I think we're not at the level of distribution of the workforce right now, where we have enough critical mass for some of those bigger companies to hire there. But that's where we can play a role, because we can help grow if we can help grow the workforce, especially with the program I just mentioned, and we connect to some of those companies, and we connect workers from different companies, then maybe we can reach a critical mass. I think it will be challenging in the kind of short term to medium term to have those bigger companies investing so much, because they need to have enough people on site to make those investments and make it interesting to them. Right now, it's more very distributed. So the only immediate opportunity that we see is create connection between students in training to companies, and then between companies, making sure that they are connected. And that's what I was doing just yesterday when I was chatting with this person from Carbonear who wanted to work with people. Well, I say, well, they are students who can work from Carbonear. So how do we connect you guys? Like this, we create this initial critical mass. I think it will take a little bit of time. I do see the opportunity. I can see that if it happens, it can be transformative for the province. From economic development, it's a game changer. And it shows something very different than bigger cities where everybody stagger together. We show something that differentiates, and I think it builds on something that we have unique to offer here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. I think the difference between creating a hub which allows people who are already resident there to actually work, and creating a peripheral hub which attracts workers from the outside. I think attracting workers from the outside is a lot more difficult, except in a very few specific areas, very high amenity areas. There's a few specific spots which are very attractive. But the general trend that I have noticed in Quebec, not so much of movement of employees, but also of residences and of companies, is to the peri-metropolitan areas, within about 100 kilometers of the big city. So they still get the critical mass of the city, but they also are a bit further away, thanks to the possibility of remote work and internet connections. The very remote places, and again, my geography is Quebec rather than Newfoundland and Labrador. So I'm thinking of Gaspésie, a place like that really haven't benefited much from remote work. So, and it's a question of critical mass, but also when workers move there, unless they're very young, typically you have to find work for the spouse. There needs to be schools for the kids. There's a whole bunch of other services that need to come, and not just the company, which I think limits the potential, unfortunately, of what you're suggesting.
I think I will start first, and that's what we are looking into too, is who are people connected to those places already? Who have families, who are the high schools there, and because we know that at one point people tend to come back to those places that they care about. So that's where, even on LinkedIn, we have been looking at, could we target people with specific expertise that are needed that are outside the province, but could we target them to bring them back into those places?
Yeah.
I could be wrong about this, but I have the sense that companies look to establish a presence in a place that already has infrastructure, already has schools, already has restaurants. But how about taking the mindset of let's pick a place and invest in it? Invest so that people can afford, there's a tax base for better schools. There are people to eat in better restaurants. I mean, you've got chefs and all kinds of interesting people moving to the Bonavista Vista Peninsula, and there's no industry there other than, you know, a couple months of tourism. But you put invest in a planned campus for a high-tech company, and imagine how that would transform that particular area, because now you've got people living there that are making real salaries, spending some of it at least locally. But if companies could get out of their minds of we need to find a community where we can extract value, and instead think, let's find a community where we can build value, and over the long term, the value creation is going to be more sustainable.
Yeah, I think it's about finding the strengths, and you need a talent pool that it makes sense for it to be there. Like, we've got companies that have sort of secondary offices or satellite offices in different areas, but there's a reason. So, for example, Avalon has set up a lab in Edmonton, which might seem random, but that's the niche of where they found the technical talent. Or Polyunity has space in Halifax, and it's because they have a partnership with the hospital. So I think there's a lot of opportunities to be explored, like you said, maybe Bonavista, because there's a beautiful tourism, and we are seeing a lot of communities start to snowball because of ocean tax. So there's definitely something. Sure.
What I've seen also as well, that's interesting, is that when the leadership of those companies is connected to those places, that's where I've seen the most effective. Like for example, on the board of TechNL, we had the CEO of Virtual Marine. Randy Bira is from the West Coast, and all the time he's kind of asking questions about, okay, what are we doing in other areas? Are there opportunities? Can I go out there to promote the opportunities for the tech sector in the high school, in areas? What else can we do? Can we hire? Do you have people we could hire in those places? So that's where the essence of what you're saying, that's where I have seen the most momentum of people who are in leadership position in those tech companies that are really attached to the place and wants to do better for their place and the place they come from.
We have a number of questions online. We have 4. But the 3rd and 4th are kind of similar. When I get to them, I'll ask them both at once. Our first question is, while we have been seeing some success in remote workers coming here with their remote jobs, what do you feel are the selling points for the reverse? That being local employers engaging remote workers from outside Newfoundland who remain in their location.
I think there's lots of opportunities. It's a global talent pool, and that's something that the tech companies should be taking advantage of. So people across the country, across the world that have that have skills that are harder to find here. So there's a huge market that we should be taking advantage of. And there's also if you are trying to sell something in South America, for example, like, you should have boots on the ground. So that opens up an opportunity that was there before. Or if you need someone in a different time zone to be doing things, there's all sorts of opportunities.
So just to clarify, the question is for people who are outside to work in the province. Is that what we're talking about?
I think Florian, what was that?
Just to clarify the question, is it for attracting people who are based outside the province and working with companies here? Or is it just want to make sure I understand the question?
Let me scroll back up and get it for you. So it's primarily for local employers engaging remote workers outside Newfoundland who stay outside Newfoundland.
And stay outside. Yeah, I mean, like, the biggest opportunity is to help to solve our challenge of experienced workers. And so it's necessary. I think it's a nice first step before attracting them here. But that's also a way to leverage a network we have throughout the world. Like we don't have to have everything here. We can have the expertise outside. And how to make it attractive to work for a tech company? Well, a couple of times a year you can come to this amazing place. And what I've heard a lot from, for example, investors, is that they are looking for opportunities to come here for an event, because that's a place that's known for other things. There's a brand around Newfoundland and Labrador, there's a nature, there's the kindness of people, the community, there are tons of stuff, and make it attractive. So I think that's one of the advantages of work remotely for a company based here.
Actually, just as a sort of follow-up to that question, is there any evidence that companies, I mean, not only Newfoundland, but in Newfoundland, are actually shopping around to get cheaper talent? Or is that not the case? Maybe during you.
Yeah, so I've actually heard from companies here that hired from or internationally, right? Just because of the price differences in the market. Another we've seen is, in terms of region similar to expertise as well, in terms of say setting certifications, right? But you have people, who do not readily have the certification locally, or it could take some time for them to get it. We have companies going outside now to just get those certifications,
Okay.
So yeah, we've seen those already happening here.
Thanks. Right, we'll go on to the other question. So just sort of...
Sure. Our next question is, how can open source community engagement platforms developed and operated locally, like the Better Together community engine, help connect and empower the tech and other communities located across Newfoundland and Labrador?
But I don't know this platform, so it would be hard to comment. It's almost like we should ask this person, how could we do that?
It's Rob from TechNL.
Oh, he knows about it. Thank you, Rob. Side questions. So what I'm hearing from Rob is that there might be an opportunity to do that. I don't know the platform, but I know you should know the platform. So I will be in touch with Rob.
What kind of platform are you talking about?
Better Together.
Better Together community engine.
Yeah, but what is it? What does that mean? What is this?
What is it?
He says it's an open source community engagement platform that's been developed and operated locally. And it connects and empowers the tech, the tech industry and other communities.
If you take away the jargon, what does that mean?
John, hear you and let you.
We unfortunately don't have the mechanism in the room for the folks online to speak, for everyone here to hear them, so we can't actually get Rob to speak to that. But hopefully folks can follow up with him.
Yeah, I think
Okay, Rob's followed up. He said that he meant it as a more general question about community platforms. So that was just his example.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It would be interesting to see if it could work in smaller area. What I tend to see is that in smaller area, like people like to have an in-person connection first, and I think that's where we need to play. But in bigger cities, that's where the degree of separation, is bigger. Like, yes, maybe those platforms can be helpful, but we can try anything.
But there's some research, in fact, from Scotland that actually says more or less that in remote local communities, a lot of the interaction is personal, but these platforms can be useful at joining communities between each other. So distant communities can actually share things, but locally the sharing is often in person. They don't use these platforms.
And there's always in communities, what I found the most effective, honestly, in terms of connection is to find the connectors. There are people who are great at this. You chat with them and they say, oh, you should chat with this person, and this person. And I think the key is to find who are those people in those communities that can connect to the rest of the community. That's what I found the most effective in practice. There are a lot of things you can do online, but like those connectors, first they know a lot. They are super connected, but at the same time, they also, since they are respected in their community, it give an incentive for people to meet with those folks that want to.
All right, thank you. Okay, so we have a couple questions here that are related, so I'm gonna take a minute and read out there's some comments and questions that relate, and then you guys can respond to whichever you wish to respond to. So we have the first one here is from Bernice, who's a student in the Master of Employment Relations program at Memorial. And her question has to do with how companies are dealing with the situation of the different personality traits of employees to ensure that some are not left behind. So her example is that extroverts love the face-to-face experience of work, and that remote or hybrid work might deprive them, whereas similarly, the introverted worker may face certain challenges as well. So what are some of the measures to help both types of employees with remote and hybrid work? And then we have another comment related that says it's become clear that there's a significant quality of work-life difference between remote employees who work for a hybrid company. So those who are working both in person and remotely. And distributed companies where they're all remote workers. So many distributed companies are creating the environments that remote workers need to thrive, whereas hybrid companies are leaving the remote workers behind. Can the panel speak to this divide and what hybrid companies can do to engage both types of employees? So essentially, how can a company ensure that both the remote worker or the worker who likes to work remotely is being treated the same as the in-person worker?
Right. So yes, this is something that many employees are struggling with, or many organizations are struggling with, the issue of those who are being left behind, right? So for instance, you work at home 3 times a week, you come in twice, and you don't get as much face time with the boss, right? You don't get to hang out as much with, your colleagues, it's almost like they don't know who you are, you're not able to form that connection, And, whether you like, there's some negative consequences that could come with that, there's some information that doesn't get passed along, right? So one of the ways I believe, many organizations can tackle this is through stronger mentorship programs, right? So, we have some of these people employed by the companies and, they've never been on ground, not one day, right? But one of the ways, that I feel many organizations could tackle this is, having, say, a senior colleague, right? Or whether it's a small organization, the direct manager or supervisor, having those, check-in meetings, making sure that, this person feels that they're part of the community, right? And apart from that, having, mandatory community building sessions, right? So say every quarter, we have, get-togethers where you get to interact with your colleagues. And that way, people do not feel that they're isolated, because that's one of the bigger issues that I feel, many people working remotely have, that lack of socialization, right? So I think, that is one thing, that I think organizations could, work harder at doing, almost like mentorship and having more community building sessions.
Yeah, interestingly, we're talking about remote work now, but actually it's been happening for a long time. It's been building up for the last 20 years or so. But one of the differences is that remote work, say in the early 2000s, was actually very organized by firms who did have these mentorship programs, who did actually test whether employees were suitable for working at home. And they actually, I read some articles which mention employers sort of doing psychological tests to see if the worker would be able to sort of work alone from home. So remote work was happening, but in a very controlled and organized environment. With COVID, what's happened is that suddenly everybody's doing it, and none of these safeguards are actually in place. And now I think we're playing catch up. And we would do well, I think, to go back and see what was being done, and how remote workers how remote work was organized before there was a flood of it. Because some of those practices, I think, could actually be useful today to address what the question is we're getting at.
There is another follow-up question. that relates. So another thing is the lack of boundaries that comes with remote hybrid work and the tendency for employees to work beyond the required hours. So how are they ensuring that employees are able to work within the time boundaries and avoid burnout?
Yeah, I mean, so I did a small study about, electronically mediated leadership, right? And, how employees perceive leadership in the virtual setting. And one of the things that many people struggled with was that work-life balance, right? The fact that, someone is messaging you at 10 p.m. at night asking you about balance sheet, which can be frustrating, which I think that is a problem that has to be dealt with from the top, right? So having those clear boundaries. If we're going to work remotely, how are we designing this? Is this going to be a 9 to 5 kind of setting? If it's going to be 9 to 5, then the same way when you leave the office, when we're in person, you leave the office, no one is knocking at your door, like, oh, you signed this for me. You'll have to wait till the next day. Then, we have this well established. If, it's designed in such a way that, well, it's not 9 to 5, it's a bit more flexible, then it's very important that, there's communication right, about, okay, these are my hours, right? And, then that way, no one is, kind of intruding into other people's, Now, this is going to be something that, many people are going to struggle with, and it's going to be very difficult to implement. But I think communication, especially from the top, is going to be key in terms of helping people to manage those boundaries, right? Because it's something that many people still struggle with.
And you could also, like, some of the things that we have been within TechNL, we have been mentioning is that so there are the hours, but there's always those requests that come at different level of urgency, and I think you need to also be clear on how do you manage those requests. Like in our case, if you receive an email, we expect that you give an answer in 1 or 2 days, business days, right? Like if you receive a Slack message, it's 2 or 3 hours of business hours. So if you receive a message at 4, well, you have until the day after to and then if you receive a text message, it's very urgent and that's exceptional. It should only be exceptional. Then we need an answer right now. But I think you need to give some priority to on the request and set the expectation how it's going to work.
Yeah, I think it's about implementing clear policies to echo that. Like, for example, at TechNL, you could have a work phone or a personal phone. So it's up to you to kind of set that boundary for yourself. And I'm sure everyone's familiar now with the Outlook notifications saying, this is not a work hour. Do you still want to send this email? So I think that technology has, kind of caused this problem, but there's also a lot of new tools in place to help with it as well.
You can schedule emails, but what I learned with scheduling emails is that don't schedule all of them at night. Doesn't solve the problem.
Are there any other questions? If not,
Online.
we will wrap up.
Oh, actually.
Oh, there's one.
We have another comment online. Not quite a question, but I'll read it out. With regards to the issue of boundaries, the company I work in has a policy around this as we work across different time zones. So we also include messages in our email signatures to the effect, my work hours may not be the same as yours. So we acknowledge our differences, and as one of the panel members noted, technology is another enabler.
That's helpful. And I just want to add something on the physical location. So there's also something when you work remotely, there's also a boundary between your workspace at home and your work personal. And I think it's very important that you define what is your physical workspace. And like this, when you leave your work and you're not staying at work while you're at home.
But that's in fact something, it does speak a bit to inequalities, to the extent that not everybody can have a space in their home which is dedicated to work.
Yeah.
And the research that I've done, sort of people who are sort of young employees sharing flats or with kids or living in small apartments actually have a lot of trouble doing that, and it is an issue.
And I think it's contribute to the burnout because it seems you never are.
Yeah. Okay, so listen, I'd like to thank you all for coming, and thank you for generously having given your time and a really interesting conversation. So thank you very much for the time. And also thanks to everybody who's been dealing with the microphones and the video, or the recording and all of that. And thanks to you online for being here. Anybody who wants to sort of hear our words of wisdom again can find this online at the Harris Centre website, I believe, the Harris Centre YouTube channel, so we'll be famous. And we're hoping to have a few more conversations like this in the sort of new year. So if you're interested in this sort of conversation, please come back. Thank you all.